My name is Abhay, and you're tuned into Climate Action Figures.
Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of Climate Action Figures. My name, as always, is John Whidden, and this week on the show you get to meet Abhay. But first, this week's quick fix. Sophia, who you might remember from a couple of episodes back, said this: guerrilla gardening is when you plant hardy seeds in boulevards and other areas that are bare. That helps soil erosion. Just ensure you use indigenous plants. Google indigenous plants in your area or find a local organization that can help you. So thanks very much, Sophia, for that, and welcome, Abhay.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Now, you know Sophia, so tell us what you think about her quick fix.
I do. I know Sophia Young from her incredible work here in Regina, Saskatchewan on transit, on making transit accessible, affordable, and for young people in the city. I think it's really exciting. And when I think about guerrilla gardening, it's something that we can all do. It's something that actually a lot of us find a lot of pleasure. And we already garden, especially in the summer. So might as well do it in a way that's better for the planet.
Very true. Speaking of amazing work, we were connected by another amazing human being, Catherine, who our viewers and listeners might remember from season 1, episode 14. You know Catherine from University of Regina, I believe, right?
Absolutely. I moved to Regina about 2.5 years ago now. And when I moved here, I was trying to understand sort of the climate landscape and also the specific eco-anxiety landscape. Eco-anxiety is something I know we'll talk more about. And I acted with this group called EcoStressSask, looking at eco-stress, climate anxiety, the other stressors that come up with climate change in a Saskatchewan context. And so that's how I met Catherine, and just that incredible work of bringing people together, creating spaces for those conversations on the climate anxiety that people face here in Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you to Catherine for connecting us. And I'm just realizing you probably know another guest we've had on the show, Kike.
Absolutely, yeah. Kike and I recently did another CBC What on Earth episode together, talking about climate anxiety and local action and the work that Kike has been leading and that we've been putting together through the Regina Youth Climate Justice Coalition. So it's a small world and a lot of really amazing people that are passionate about these topics.
Great. Well, if you have not met Kike on the program, you should definitely go and listen to that episode of What on Earth. Now, speaking of What on Earth, our listeners and viewers might know you as a regular contributor on that program. It's a very popular national radio show. How did you get involved in that?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I was approached by the CBC Radio What on Earth team about being their climate change and mental health columnist. And this was a couple of years ago now. I'd been doing work at this intersection of climate change and mental health. And it sort of just followed actually a spontaneous episode that I did. The first ever episode that I did before I was a regular columnist was around a really bad wildfire season. I think this was 3 summers ago now, where, again, this is sort of the new norm. So it's sometimes hard to situate like, oh, which wildfire season was that? Because last year was the worst season on record in Saskatchewan. The year before, we saw it in different places. And so it's a really bad wildfire season. And I came on to sort of talk about how this is increasing in prominence, but also what we can do when it comes to how we feel about it. I think in the immediate aftermath of climate disasters, the sort of big, sort of record-setting disasters that make the headlines, mental health and how we feel can sometimes be forgotten. And so really my first ever episode was sharing stories about that. And the episode went really well. I think we got a lot of really good interest. And from that point on, I came on as a columnist, and it's been incredible just to be able to hear from so many other speakers, interact with the team at What on Earth, and actually get to share stories of, again, climate resilience and mental health and what it means as communities to come together when it comes to the climate crisis.
Well, it's been great to hear your opinions and your research and what you bring to that program. So wonderful. We'll definitely link those episodes to What on Earth in the show notes if our listeners and viewers want to check that out. Now, Abhay, you took a pivotal trip in your youth to Nunavut, and that shaped what the direction you took, I think, didn't it?
Totally.
Tell us about that.
Absolutely. When I think about like my roots in climate action and working at this intersection of climate change, mental health, community resilience, a lot of it starts with growing up on the west coast of Canada, growing up in BC. I grew up really connected to nature, as a lot of people from BC talk about. Like, you know, now that I moved to Saskatchewan, I'm like, oh, people from BC, they're so annoying. But really, like, I think growing up with the mountains beside me, the ocean, and just forest all around, like, I had such a strong connection with the environment. I became involved in my school's environmental club in elementary school and high school. We were doing invasive weed species removals, community cleanups, environmental education presentations. We were doing waste reduction in our school. And again, I was very fortunate looking back to have been able to join an ecosystem of environmental activists or advocates that were already working on things. When I was in grade 8, I was learning from grade 11 and 12 students. And so I just think about that sort of peer mentorship that played a really positive role in my understanding of these issues. And so when I was 14 years old, after having done a lot of local environmental action programming just through my school's green team, I had this incredible opportunity to travel to the Arctic. So I was on an expedition through an amazing organization called Students on Ice. They take students to the Arctic and Antarctic every year. And I was one of 200 people on this expedition, 100 scientists, historians, musicians, educators, and 100 young people. And the 100 young people, we came from all over the world. About 70 of us were Canadian. And of the 70 Canadian youth, about half were Inuit. So half were Inuit from the Arctic. And so this expedition, I think, was just so incredible at 14 years old to go from Labrador, sail out of Frobisher Bay, down the coast of Labrador, be up in Nunavut, and go all the way up to Greenland. And we spent about 2 weeks on this expedition, really learning about climate change, understanding the land, understanding the history of the land. And mental health was something that came up on that expedition too. So I'd say that initial Arctic expedition was at 14, just such an incredible experience for me.
We continuously hear about how the North is affected far more than the South in terms of climate change. With your connections up there, do you find that there is more climate anxiety up there than there is down here?
I think that was one of the introductory things that I really learned about in that Arctic expedition. Again, I only spent 2 weeks in the Arctic, but the time I'd say was very transformative. And one of the biggest things that I learned about was suicide rates in the North. Suicide rates for youth in the Arctic are 11 times higher than the Canadian national average. And so learning about that at 14 years old, and again, learning about mental health struggles and these things just in my own community, I made a lot of those connections. One of the things that, again, I understood at a deeper level being in the North, and since then, is the immense ways in which when we think about climate anxiety, it can often be quite layered and complex for indigenous folks, and especially for Inuit in the Arctic, considering the fact that climate change is absolutely changing land and it's changing culture that's connected to land. Polar ice is melting, and so that's impacting traditional cultural activities like seal hunting. Weather is changing, but the very drastic changes on livelihood, the ability to just go out and have predictable seasons of the year and engage in local activities, like that's changing. Polar bears are migrating south into people's communities, and that's causing a lot of harm. Houses are becoming uneven because of melting permafrost and the uneven way in which permafrost is melting. And I think when it comes to climate anxiety, I think it cannot be disconnected actually from the ongoing legacies of colonialism. And in climate change, I began to understand as a colonial imposition in the North, that it's not a separate project. Rather, it's climate justice and climate injustice in action. Those that have suffered, those that have contributed least to the problem of climate change are experiencing most of the impacts. And so the unfairness of that, I think, too, really was something that was very clear to me, just on the mental health front and on the climate front, and where they intersect because of the impacts on culture and community.
Now, Abhay, we definitely have audience members who are young and also many who are teachers, so we need to talk about Break the Divide. This is your nonprofit that connects young people and enables them to talk about climate change and mental health. What are the roots of Break the Divide?
The roots to Break the Divide are this Arctic expedition. Not only when I was in the Arctic did I see the firsthand impacts of climate change, I saw glaciers melting in front of my eyes. I saw polar bears. I saw communities directly being impacted. I learned about all these impacts from my new friends in the North. I think I also learned very deeply about what it feels like to experience that overwhelming sense of fear, burden, anxiety about the future firsthand. I remember there's this one moment at the Ilulissat ice fjord in Greenland. This is a place where you can see ice stretched out kilometers and kilometers as far as your eyes can see. And I remember all 200 people went silent in that moment, and we could literally hear the ice melting. Such a powerful moment, but such an overwhelming moment. I went into this expedition telling people that I was going to go solve climate change. And here I am, literally on top of the world, the furthest north I've ever been. And I felt like I had the burden of the world on my shoulders too. I didn't really know what to do. I felt so overwhelmed and scared and anxious about the future because of climate change. And I saw that my friends, my new friends, they were being impacted too. And I thought about the impacts in my own community. This is 2016 at this point. So I think the direct impacts, perhaps in Metro Vancouver, the lower mainland of BC, weren't as pronounced as today. But I still noticed climate change and the conversations on environmental action that I'd been having. And so I remember the one thing that really grounded me in that north was connection. It was being connected with my Inuit friends in the Arctic and talking about their cultures and the resilience that they've had, their communities, and how they've been adapting. Because the Arctic, as you mentioned, John, has been warming at twice the rate as the rest of the world. And we know that communities have had to adapt for decades now. Climate change is not new. So I learned about those adaptations, and that excited me because it meant that there's stuff that we can do. When we come together, there's a lot. So that was sort of the inception, the idea. And when I came back home to my community, back to Surrey, BC, I was really excited and I wanted to do something. And so I talked to my high school teacher, my green team, Mr. Aiketa, great social studies teacher, social justice advocate. And I chatted with him about my ideas. I chatted with my older brother. I chatted with lots of friends. And we just had this idea sort of collectively of what if we just get young people like me in my high school talking to students in the Arctic like I did. We could talk about what it's like to live where we live, what it's like to experience the local impacts of climate change, and see if that process of coming together could do something. And so that's where sort of the name Break the Divide came from. And that's where the idea started. It was a small high school club connecting my high school in Delta, BC, with a school in Inuvik in the Northwest Territories. And it was incredible. We started video call sessions. Again, this was 2016, 2017, before Zoom was cool. So those video call sessions were incredible. We talked about our communities. We talked about what we did for fun and the local impacts of climate change. And as we got to know each other, we became friends and we talked about our families, our cultures, our histories, and the ways in which those actually often intersect with climate, with the environment. And so it became very deep very quickly. And that sense of connection sort of inspired a lot of local action, and that empathy building process, I think, was really powerful. So that was the roots, actually, and just that idea of connection being sort of fundamental to how we break down divisions.
Now, Break the Divide, since that time, has really grown and deepened as an organization. Yeah. Tell us about how it's changed over the years.
From a youth-led, fully volunteer-led high school project. And, we scaled as a high school group. We began international video call connections to talk about local impacts of climate change. We talked to kids in Cape Town, South Africa about the water crisis that was going on there. We talked to youth in Bolivia about extractive industry and mining and how that played a role in their lives. Youth in Taiwan about urbanization, in Siberia about being in a really rural area and how climate impacts are felt there, sort of global connections, and across Canada as well. And that idea, again, of how do we feel and how are we experiencing these local impacts of climate change was really big. In 2020, when COVID-19 hit, when the pandemic hit, we ran an international art competition about climate change and mental health. And in 2020 and 2022, 2023, sort of over the past 4 or 5 years, we've really began to see, actually, as more research and literature has emerged about the impacts of climate change on mental health. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, where I studied global health and conflict resolution. And there, climate change came up as a major factor in both global health crises and conflict. And so immediately, as I became involved with research projects, I did some of my own research, and I became quite engaged in the literature on the subject. I saw that actually, again, the research is clear. Young people are feeling the burden of climate anxiety in many different ways across Canada and across the world. And it was very clear that there's a need for interventions, for programs that support young people's mental health. We had been doing really excellent climate conversations that sort of naturally bring up these topics together without even having a strong theoretical framing, the literature framing behind it. And so what we thought in 2023 as a team, as an organization, we had grown as a volunteer team. We thought, why not actually bring this together and actually intentionally frame Break the Divide and our approach as one of the many solutions to this crisis of mental health as climate anxiety worsens. Why not frame it in that way? So we built curriculum. We partnered with mental health practitioners and educators, and we launched programming across Canada to essentially do what we had been doing, but working directly with teachers. So it was embedded in curriculum. It was embedded in practice. 2024, we ran a national sort of virtual climate emotions connection program where youth engaged with facilitators that we had trained, sort of near peer facilitators as mentors, that would then go into classrooms via Zoom and deliver virtual sessions to talk about these topics. And then the youth in different communities would connect with each other. We had kids in Ottawa talking to kids in Vancouver, young people in Nova Scotia talking to kids in Toronto. And through those connections, we saw young people feel more connected, less alone, and have a greater sense of agency to take action. That was sort of our big approach. We became incorporated as a nonprofit. And since then, we've done a lot more in-person programming, largely focused here in Saskatchewan.
That sounds like a wonderful program. Now, if we have young people or educators who are tuning in today and thinking, I really want to get more involved in this, how do they get in?
Our programs are very open to anyone. We do workshops across Canada about these topics. Now our core in-person programming is our climate education and resilience program. In this past year, we trained facilitators under 30, so as young people, to go into high schools in person and deliver climate emotion sessions to facilitate conversation on local impacts of climate change, which again, in Saskatchewan and the prairies, we actually know that they're very clear impacts. Facilitate those conversations, introduce the idea of climate emotions, and create space for youth to have intentional conversations about how they feel, what they want to do when it comes to climate change and climate action. So that's our core program. We're actually scaling this program and launching it across the prairies, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba schools this coming September 2026. And so if anyone's in those regions, the prairies, especially in rural communities, we want to bring this program to you. So you can head to our website, breakthedivide.net, clear program information and program pages where you can always learn more. But you're always welcome to reach out to me directly as well to learn more about these programs. Wherever you are in Canada, we want to support you in bringing these conversations. Educators, people in schools, young people are already at the front lines of these conversations. What we're doing is bringing a framework and an intentional conversation structure, a facilitation structure, and bringing in trainers to talk about these things in your own community. So we're more than happy to collaborate.
And the Break to the Divide website is linked in our show notes, so you can click on that link to go there. And is that how they would contact you, through the contact information there?
Absolutely. You're always welcome to reach me directly at Abhay@breakthedivide.net as well.
Now, Abhay, you've done a lot of research into mental health and climate change. You have a lot of experience in that milieu. The link between these two things is not lost on me, as that is the root of this podcast. I wonder if you feel that there are a lot of people who don't make that connection, especially in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan, where oil production is always front of mind, so it's more difficult to talk about climate.
I think that's an excellent question. I think we don't often name this connection explicitly. When you feel a sense of frustration because governments aren't taking climate action, you kind of just leave it at that, like it's frustration. Or when you feel really anxious about the upcoming summer, because you know that, in the past summers might have been really peaceful and nice and warm, but now there's probably going to be at least a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of really bad smoke because we know that wildfires happen. Or if you feel a sense of loss because the forest that you knew in the past or the future that you imagine no longer will exist. Those are all what we call climate emotions, emotions that are related to the environment and the climate crisis, what we know is going on with climate change. And I think in Alberta and Saskatchewan, we see this a lot, where people will have frustration, whether it's with provincial governments or industries that do extract and pollute our planet. But it might also just be for folks that are farmers or in rural areas, noticing that crop yield is going down, or there's greater unpredictability when it comes to climate and weather patterns. And to feel these emotions, to feel all of these things, or even the emotion of denying that climate change exists. It's not real. It's a hoax. It doesn't impact us. But, people notice their environments and people see what's going on. And whether it's the emotions that we've been talking about, anxiety, grief, fear, anger, or even if it's polarization, denial, apathy, people feel what it means to live in a climate that is increasingly unpredictable, knowing that there is going to be more variability. And so even if we're not connecting with the science directly and the climate science, because maybe that can be kind of dubious and hard for people to relate to, if we're just looking at what's going on in our own communities, people feel certain ways about climate change. And so that's where I think we actually have a really awesome potential in the prairies to reach people through the lens of emotions and through the lens of how we feel, to connect on climate issues. So actually using emotions as the conduit to climate action potentially.
So Abhay, I think we're getting a small snippet of the in-school program here, right?
Absolutely.
Now, so to continue your thinking, if people are frustrated by that, feeling anxious about the lack of action that they see going on in terms of dealing with climate, what do we do with that?
I think, honestly, the first really important step is recognizing an emotion, naming it, acknowledging it for what it is, acknowledging where it comes from. That anxiety, or even if it's anger at decision makers or corporations, that means that you care and that you're connected. And connecting with other people on those emotions is actually a really excellent first place to build vulnerability and connection, because we can't do this alone. There's a lot of individual actions that, of course, we can take, but for the systemic collective actions that we want to take, we need to bring people together. And so connecting with those in your own community about those emotions, I think, is an excellent start. After that, I think there's so much that we can do, and it's not easy. It's not easy to go against, again, big industries or governments that don't really want to take climate action. But I think finding ways to start and small ways to start is incredibly important. I know you've had other speakers talk about the ways that they've taken local climate action, and we really focus our programming on finding what connects to you, finding what connects to communities that you already have a sphere of influence in. Maybe you play hockey every Tuesday and your hockey team involves like 10 different people taking 10 cars to the same place, but you actually all live in the same place. Maybe you could carpool. And that's small, but it's a systemic change because it starts in your own sphere of influence, your own community of influence. Maybe your school doesn't have a waste reduction program. It doesn't have any green bins for composting. That's something that you can start with. Or electrification at a local business that you always go to. Maybe you can support them in a grant application to get solar panels. Again, those are just ideas that actually a lot of us can do alone. But when it comes to governments, I think there's a lot of power in coming together. Here in Regina, we've been organizing as a group of young people through the Regina Youth Climate Justice Coalition. This is a group that was created with Break the Divide and support from the David Suzuki Foundation, where we've hosted dialogues with youth in Regina to explore local impacts of climate change, the issues that youth care about, and how we feel about it. And transit has come up as a major issue in Regina. Again, building on a lot of the work of Sophia Young, Better Bus Youth, and existing programming in Regina, we see transit as an absolute climate justice issue. It impacts issues of affordability, accessibility, access to care, and it's a climate issue as well. So we've been coming together to give delegations to city council, to do public awareness campaigns on transit and seeing it as a climate issue. My point with all this, John, really is like, there's a lot that we can do. But I think thinking about climate change as a big crisis is overwhelming. And it is for anyone. Breaking it down into how you feel, where you're connected, who you are, what you can do, and connecting with others to start within the spheres of influence that you have. That's sort of been my approach. And that's the approach that we really focus on at Break the Divide.
What do you say to people who, we've both heard this before, we're taking small actions, we're encouraging people who take small actions, they're getting some publicity in this podcast, and then someone will say, that's wonderful, but it's not enough. What do you say to those people?
I'd say probably isn't enough. It probably isn't enough to change the world, but is that the goal? Is the goal of us as an individual person to change the world? And I think it actually, what is enough? I think we need to maybe reframe what enough is, because if the threshold for doing enough is always stopping the climate crisis, if it's what I had as a 14-year-old going to the Arctic, I'm going to solve climate change, then nothing we do is enough. But if it's actually making a change somewhere where you can and starting something, bringing people together, or actually cultivating the values and the vision of the world in which you want to live, starting that process of building a better world, if you're doing that work, however small, that's incredible. So I think sometimes actually we need to change our frame of reference when we hear that. That's not a good question. That's not a good statement. It's not useful to say you're not doing enough, when in reality we're not, to solve the climate crisis. There are systemic shifts needed at multiple levels, at industry, governments, institutions, local communities, individual households. But we can't do all of it. And so I think sometimes, again, focusing on all that there is to do can distract us from what we are able to do and what we can do now. I think it's good to have our foot on the gas pedal and push forward, but I think, realizing what we can do and what's realistic too is actually a practice of active hope.
Let's do what we can do. Now, it seems like youth these days have more difficulty connecting with others. You mentioned that earlier, than youth have had in the past. Do you have ideas about what educators and youth can do about that?
I think it's something that I've even noticed through our programming at Break the Divide. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we heard from a lot of teachers about wanting more local programs that help young people connect within their own classrooms, not just with other communities. And so I think for educators and young people, I think connecting around shared interests, connecting around, again, what we can do and what we can focus on is really powerful. I think the other big piece that I think about when it comes to connection is just actually acknowledging why there might be apathy or disconnection in the first place. There's a lot going on for young people, and climate might not be the top concern. but actually bringing in climate to other issues and seeing how they intersect. How do they contribute to one another? How does climate change worsen food insecurity in Canada? How is climate change worsening the housing crisis that we have? The top issues that we might be caring about as everyday people, maybe those are more top of mind. But again, it's also overwhelming that we end up in sort of pathways of apathy. And I see that on a lot of young people. It's so bad. What's the point? There's nothing I can do. That powerlessness that also sort of comes together with apathy. But if we sort of, again, break it down, create intentional pathways for connection, I think there's a lot that we can do. And again, I think educators can play a really fundamental role in that process.
Well, we need to wrap up our conversation here today, but we've talked about little actions. And tell us about what your climate action is that you've chosen for us today.
My personal climate action that I've really enjoyed has been biking. I don't have a car, living in the very car-centric city of Regina, Saskatchewan. I take the bus a lot, but I really enjoy biking. And especially in the summer, I find that I'm able to bike around a lot. And it's a good form of exercise. It's something that I've really just come to enjoy.
Well, that makes two of us, because I love cycling, winter, summer, any season at all. And cycling. Winter cycling, by the way, just need some studs on those tires and you're good to go.
Honestly, well, I think I need to look into it, and I want to figure it out. So John, I'll probably reach out to you about this.
The guy who inspired me said there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad gear. So there you go. That's Absolutely. The first bit of advice. Last question for you today, Abhay. What gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope is community, and not just young people and the potential of young people for the future, although that is incredibly hope-inducing to see the ideas of young people younger than me and how passionate they are, how aware they are, how emotionally intelligent they are about not just climate change, but issues of climate justice, and how there are deep inequities that we need to address. And I think that's really promising to me. But I also don't want to put just the burden on young people. I see a lot of potential and hope in communities of, again, elders, older people that still have energy and have so much to contribute in the communities that we can cultivate. I think community is really what brings me hope, and the potential of us as local communities, geographic communities, communities based on interest, communities based on shared identities. When we can come together and take action, a lot is possible. I think starting with our communities and focusing on what, again, we can do, how we relate, and building stronger relationships. I think that's really key.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Abhay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, John. It's been a great conversation, and I'm so excited just, again, for all that's to come. This conversation has me excited about how we move forward and create a better world.
Wonderful. And thank you, dear listener and viewer. If you like what you've heard here today, please hit the like and or subscribe buttons. It helps get the word out. We will be back again next week, same time, same place. And this time we will be joined by our creative consultant, Kayla, and we'll have a little shakedown on the entire season 3. So please join us then. Until then,
go figures.
This has been Climate Action Figures. Our show is produced and hosted by John Whidden. Our creative consultant is Kayla McIntosh. Our theme song is Hawaii Vacation by Tovari. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Climate Action Figures. That's all one word. And if you have any other questions or comments that arose from this or any episode, feel free to reach out to us at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another Climate Action Figures.